While Canadians struggle with rising costs, trade disruptions, and growing uncertainty, one question keeps echoing across this nation. Are we truly being represented? As Prime Minister Mark Carney opens the door to deeper ties with China, many Canadians are demanding transparency, and some are even calling for a recount. Welcome back, fellow Canadians. If you're concerned about the direction our country is taking under Mark Carney's leadership, you're not alone. This week, we're diving deep into one of the most controversial moves yet, a warming of relations with China at a time when our economic sovereignty is already at risk. We're not saying a recount is happening, but given what's at stake, we believe it's time to call for one. Let's start with a backdrop. Under Donald Trump's presidency, the United States imposed heavy tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, 50% on some exports, 25% on others, including auto parts. These weren't minor changes. These were economic punches. And instead of strengthening ties with our closest and most important ally, Mark Carney's Liberal government began talking about China. While businesses were reeling from U.S. tariffs, Ottawa signaled it would explore expanding exports to China, as if replacing the U.S. with Beijing was a sustainable option. After a meeting of First Ministers in Saskatoon earlier this month, Carney confirmed that his government was working at the ministerial level with China, aiming to thaw relations after years of tension. He called it a top priority. Think about that. At a time when Canadians are struggling, when our farmers, steelworkers, and manufacturers need support, the Liberal government prioritized negotiations with the Chinese Communist Party. That's not just questionable foreign policy, it's a red flag. It raises serious concerns about whose interest this government is really serving. When Canada slapped a 100% tariff on Chinese-made electric vehicles, China fired back. Retaliation came fast. Tariffs on canola meal, pork, seafood, and other vital Canadian exports. Instead of standing firm, Mark Carney's response? He began quiet negotiations with Chinese officials, aiming to remove those counter-tariffs. On the surface, that might seem like diplomacy, but behind the scenes, we're watching a government that punishes Canadian farmers with one hand and then turns around and compromises with a regime that's known for economic coercion. That's not leadership. That's political damage control, and Canadians are paying the price. Now here's where things get even more concerning. Mark Carney's government recently agreed to regularize communication with China, establishing ongoing dialogue between Canadian and Chinese officials. This isn't just about trade. This is about laying the foundation for a long-term political and economic relationship with the Chinese Communist Party. At a time when our allies, the U.S., Australia, even parts of Europe, are pulling away from Beijing's influence, Canada under Carney seems to be moving in the opposite direction. Who will approve this? Who voted for a government that prioritizes deeper ties with an authoritarian state over protecting our democratic and economic integrity? Supporters of this shift claim that Canadian businesses are pushing for stronger trade with China. But let's be clear, which businesses are we talking about? Small farms? Local manufacturers? Independent truckers? Or is it the corporate giants and lobby-backed firms that stand to benefit, the same ones that often donate to Liberal campaigns and receive generous federal contracts? Carney's administration frames this pivot as economic resilience. But many Canadians see it for what it is, a risky realignment guided by globalist interests, not national ones. And when a government starts listening more to foreign powers and elite business networks and to its own people, we have every right to question the legitimacy of that leadership. This shift toward China isn't just an economic issue, it's a national security concern. Intelligence experts and security officials have repeatedly warned about Chinese interference in Canadian institutions, from universities to elections. And yet, the Carney government seems willing to overlook those warnings in favor of reopening trade channels. Why are we normalizing relations with a regime that's been accused of cyber espionage, intellectual property theft, and targeting diaspora communities? Canadians deserve to know, is this government truly putting our sovereignty first, or is it walking us into long-term dependence on Beijing? That's why more and more citizens are saying, clearly and calmly, it's time for a recount. While Ottawa strengthens ties with China, Western Canada is once again left out of the equation. Alberta, Saskatchewan, provinces that produce the canola, the pork, the resources we rely on, have been hit hard by China's retaliatory tariffs. And yet, the Carney government isn't standing up for them. Instead, it's focused on restoring trade with China while ignoring the very regions bearing the cost of this foreign policy gamble. This isn't new. Western alienation has only deepened under liberal rule. And this latest pivot to China sends a loud and clear message. Ottawa's priorities are not aligned with yours. No wonder the calls for a recount are growing, because more and more Canadians feel left behind. Here's something even more troubling. Where's the media? A major geopolitical shift is happening under our feet, and yet Canada's mainstream outlets are nearly silent. You won't see breaking headlines questioning Carney's China strategy. You won't hear panel debates about why our government is cozying up to an authoritarian regime during a trade war with our closest ally. Why the silence? Could it be that media outlets, many of which receive millions in federal subsidies, are hesitant to criticize the very government that funds them? When the public doesn't get honest coverage, and when legitimate concerns are brushed aside, democracy suffers. And that's exactly why many Canadians are demanding a recount, not because we know something happened, but because we no longer trust that it didn't. Now let's talk about the recent G7 summit in Alberta. This should have been an opportunity to show strong leadership, defend Canadian values, and stand with our democratic allies. Instead, Mark Carney used a global stage to promote economic cooperation while quietly signaling openness to China. The message? Canada will adapt to a shifting world, even if that means warming up to Beijing. But here's what wasn't addressed. The strain on Canadian workers, the voices of provinces under pressure, the millions of Canadians who don't want their country tied more closely to an authoritarian regime. The summit ended with polished speeches and handshakes, but no reassurance to Canadians who are starting to question whether this government was truly chosen by them or chosen for them. So, why are we asking for a recount? Because when a government shifts policy this dramatically, quietly, without clear public mandate or accountability, Canadians have a right to ask, was this the will of the people? Mark Carney and the Liberals have opened the door to deeper ties with China amid a tense global trade war and growing concerns about our national security. This is not a small policy change. It's a fundamental shift in how Canada positions itself on the world stage. Our viewers, our neighbors, our fellow citizens, many of whom voted to protect Canadian jobs and sovereignty, deserve transparency and trust. A recount isn't about undermining democracy. It's about restoring confidence in it. Thank you for watching. If you share concerns about where this government is taking Canada, please like, share, and subscribe to help this conversation reach more Canadians. We're all in this together, and our voices matter.